Well, the age-old question between hydrogen fuel cells and batteries has simply not reached a conclusion. It seems like there's more divisiveness every single day in the investment community about which technology will actually support our decarbonization efforts the best. Those who invest in Tesla say battery and lithium-ion technology will be the answer to all the trucking problems, whereas those that invest in external companies and more early-stage startups say that hydrogen fuel cells or even renewable natural gas trucks could be the future for EV trucking. Well, I have some good news. A recent study conducted by the NREL organization, or the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, has just disclosed its results of a 3-year study between hydrogen fuel cells and battery powertrains for long-haul and short-haul trucking. And it's safe to say that the results are extremely surprising. So strap in, folks, because we have a lot of data and charts to look at to truly understand the scope of this problem. But as usual, guys, before we get into it, make sure to drop me a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. So first things first, I'm not going to address the consumer vehicle industry when it comes to hydrogen versus batteries, because I think the answer is very simple, and that is that batteries will perform all the tasks that traditional cars need to perform, and that is simply just going to be the best way forward for that industry. And obviously the reason for that is pretty simple. Cars are often used on a daily basis and they can be charged overnight at home. And if you pair that with the fact that most cars don't travel more than 50 to 100 miles a day, battery electric cars make a lot of sense, especially if you consider the fact that hydrogen infrastructure is still not practical for most consumers. And so at least now with the state of those technologies today, it makes no sense to really invest in hydrogen when we know that battery electric cars can do most of the tasks for those vehicles and those applications. Now, things can obviously change in the future where all of a sudden battery technology is surpassed by hydrogen fuel cell technology, which results in a lower total cost of ownership and potentially even better refueling times, but obviously the technology is simply not there yet. However, where things get really crazy is in the trucking industry, which obviously is one of the biggest polluters in the entire world. And because of the very high duty cycle that these trucks are run to, and the fact that these trucks are often run by businesses who are trying to make money, it's extremely important to pick a correct technology that can provide fleet operators and owner operators the right total cost of ownership. And that is exactly where this big old debate stems from. People are trying to experiment with both technologies for different types of trucking applications, which is causing a lot of investors who might not be familiar with these technologies on a very low level to misunderstand what this argument is actually about. You see, there's different types of trucking, especially in the US. There's short-haul parcel delivery trucking, which is typically done by Class 4 trucks, and then there is Class 8 short-haul trucking, which again is typically in the range of 300 miles. Long-haul trucking, which is typically when you have owner-operators owning their own trucks and driving long distances over 600 miles a day, that's when you use Class 8 trucks that are typically run on diesel or natural gas with sleeper cabins. And it is that exact industry that needs to be addressed by electrification, because rising diesel fuel prices and unsustainability of importing is simply leaving these big fleet operators with a lot of headache for the future, as they have no clue what the future price of their fuel and as a result their operating costs will be. And even though on paper hydrogen fuel cells make the most sense for this specific long-haul application, some technologies and developments in the lithium-ion space are potentially hinting at a domination by the battery space. And well, to figure out if those claims are actually true, let's deep dive into the recent study conducted by the NREL organization. As you can see, this study conducted an examination of 3 different types of trucking, which is Class 4 parcel, Class 8 short haul, and then Class 8 long haul. The 3 main technologies that they tested out and put into their own financial models were fuel cell electric, battery electric, and then plug-in hybrid electric. And the latter was also partnered with a diesel engine, which is obviously what you need in a hybrid drivetrain. And as you can see, if you start off by just looking at the upfront cost conclusions for all of these technologies, it seems like batteries are indeed the most expensive solution by far for long-haul trucking, anything over 750 miles of range. As you can see, fuel cell electric powertrains are considerably cheaper than battery electric, but they're still heavier and more expensive than plug-in hybrid or diesel and CNG. But as we all know, we are headed towards a carbon zero emissions future, which is exactly where plug-in hybrid, diesel, or CNG is simply not going to make it. And the very clear limiting factor for battery electric solutions here is the battery cost. The more range you need, the more your exponential increase in battery cost becomes a factor in total cost. And for long-haul trucking, that is simply not gonna cut it. But now if we go down the order and look at shorter range solutions of around 120 miles for class 4 parcel delivery, that's when fuel cell electric vehicles become much more expensive than battery electric, even though their battery costs are still much higher. This right here is the simple answer to this debate about battery versus hydrogen. You simply need to look at the use case for that technology, not where the technology is today, because the TCO is what matters to most consumers. And this right here is just also the upfront cost. And so if you start looking at TCO scenarios where weights are limited and there's multi-shift operations, that's when the difference between BEV and fuel cell becomes even more apparent. As you can see, the total cost of ownership by 2025 is expected to be higher for BEVs on average than for fuel cell solutions, and that is given a big part towards the fuel cost, which again we expect to come down drastically for hydrogen as more infrastructure is built and as the cost of renewable energy also starts to fall. Because keep in mind, hydrogen has a lot of use cases, and with every kilogram that hydrogen is used, the cost for supplying it drops faster than for an equivalent kilowatt hour of electricity because of simply how energy dense the hydrogen molecule actually is. And as you can also see, it's clear that the dwell costs in blue become a major component and bottleneck for battery technology for anything over a 500-mile range Class 8 long-haul tractor. Because for those that don't know, dwells are essentially fines that you incur as a business if your truck is sitting at a station for too long. It's typically an hourly rate, and it does start to add up for most customers because it is typically calculated as a percentage of the amount of stuff that you're actually shipping. And so if you have a battery electric truck that needs to charge anything between an hour to 2 hours, that's going to cost you as a company a lot of money. And yes, even though the fuel economy for a fuel cell powertrain is lower than a battery electric powertrain, the simple added cost for the powertrain over a longer haul scenario and the added fuel costs and downtime costs add up to a higher TCO, which results in the fuel cell technology being a better solution for that particular market. And this is something that many investors simply get wrong. They just look at one perspective and don't account for the other factors that also play into analyzing the total cost of ownership. And as a matter of fact, the conclusion that NREL received after this study was that BEVs may be the best solution for shorter range applications where dwell time is not as big of a concern, but FCEVs will be a better solution for longer ranges over 500 miles, where operating scenarios are much more stringent and downtime actually starts costing a lot of money to those operators. And by far the most important analysis of this entire report is the fact that zero emissions vehicles do indeed have a pathway to achieve cost parity with diesel, which is something that many non-climate activists simply forget to understand. A zero emissions future in the trucking industry is going to happen because it is a complete necessity for the sustainability of our transportation industry and the reduction of carbon dioxide. But that does not mean that not all technologies are going to make it. Every single type of technology will have its own role to play in the decarbonization race, just like we use steam engines for trains, diesel engines for trucks, and natural gas engines for other vehicles. And the real edge that hydrogen fuel cells provide for longer range applications is that their power output and capacity is completely unlinked, meaning you can increase the fuel cell power units while not having to increase the amount of energy you're storing on board. Whereas with a battery, you have to scale both of those factors simultaneously, which means that if a company is simply looking for more range, they also have to have a bigger power battery pack, which adds unnecessary cost. And as a company like Nikola has already demonstrated, hydrogen fuel cell trucks can be built on existing chassis very effectively without all the safety concerns that many people have been talking about with hydrogen fuel. And because of the relative simplicity of hydrogen fuel cell vehicles when compared to even diesel and internal combustion engines, hydrogen is actually a lot safer than most people would think, because hydrogen gas immediately disperses into the atmosphere vertically in a matter of milliseconds if there's any sort of leak, which is obviously much safer than a gasoline spill, which could actually cause a fire in the vehicle and harm other nearby components. It's already been tested that composite hydrogen tanks can survive up to 2 bullet blasts, which is obviously significantly more pressure than they would ever experience in a real-life scenario. And although yes, in the consumer EV business, hydrogen fuel cells are probably excessively complicated, for the trucking business they make a lot of sense, because you're using a fuel that is much more versatile than electrons to power a vehicle with zero emissions, while providing you the flexibility of operating like a diesel engine, given the fact that it takes a couple of minutes to refuel and that you can simply use existing natural gas infrastructure that is simply adapted for hydrogen fuel. And the best part is that hydrogen fuel cell technology is already being incubated for other applications like cruise ships, boats, and even aircraft, because for those kinds of use cases, they're the only possible solution for zero emissions, because batteries would simply be too heavy and too costly. And so as those additional developments in the hydrogen space continue to take place alongside back-end hydrogen investments for electrolysis to produce green hydrogen, the cost of hydrogen fuel is also going to start coming down exponentially, and with economies of scale, the capital expenditure for hydrogen products is also going to start falling, which means the advantage for using fuel cells for long-haul trucking is only going to be amplified. And that, I think, is something many people don't realize. Hydrogen is significantly earlier along the curve than battery technology, because battery technology has been in the business for over 50 years, and it's been tested and tried by many different types of manufacturers for many different applications. Meaning at that point, battery technology is simply much more refined than hydrogen fuel cells today, meaning the infrastructure is there and the capital expenditure is much lower. And that has been true for every single technology in the world. Not one single technology on this planet was cheap and cost effective at the very beginning. And like the study just showed you, efficiency does not really play into this argument of batteries versus fuel cells, because that is simply looking at the end-to-end energy output, not how costs and durability play into that. And that's exactly why this chart that has been floating around on social media for such a long time is so misleading. Yes, there's more steps involved to convert hydrogen gas from renewable energy into usable electricity for cars, which means that the efficiency is naturally going to be lower. But that is the same case for gasoline, which is actually 30% lower efficiency than hydrogen. But we still use gasoline on a day-to-day basis, and as a matter of fact, 99.95% of all cars in the world use gasoline engines. And clearly, efficiency was not the driving factor for that adoption. Instead, it was the versatility and the insane practicality that gasoline as a fuel provides because of its high energy density, its easy flowability, and obviously the fact that its power and capacity can be scaled independently. And it's safe to say that that is probably the biggest reason why hydrogen fuel cells are so misunderstood in the role for trucking and even EVs, because simply the technology is too complicated and many people just don't know the terms and metrics you should be looking at to determine TCO. But as usual guys, that is just my thoughts, so let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below.